But first, a fiscal sinkhole. A sinkhole. That's how the respected former head of the Productivity Commission, Professor Gary Banks, yesterday described the NDIS. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate that people with serious disabilities deserve the decent life that the NDIS was created to give them. It's just that something is seriously wrong when 10% of all Australian boys aged 5 to 7 years of age in this country are on the NDIS, largely because of autism diagnoses, and parents are reportedly paying up to $5,000 to get a supposedly professional opinion to keep their kids on the NDIS for life in the hope there'll be a lifetime of financial support and help. As former NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds told the Australian newspaper today, 1 in 10 of our young boys are on the NDIS. Either 10% of our young men are becoming increasingly disabled or something else is happening. Reynolds says she wants to see independent doctors assess whether children should access the NDIS for autism rather than relying on the child's own clinicians, saying a standardised assessment model was essential to ensure the scheme's sustainability. The NDIS is actually a case study in the sort of policy making where good intentions and wishful thinking trump hard-headed analysis that Professor Banks says is seriously compromising our future as a viable nation. The intention of the NDIS to give people whose disabilities meant they weren't able to live a normal life access to services from a range of private providers rather than a government-run institution was perfectly honourable. But there was never enough thought given to ensuring that the services really were needed, were being provided on a cost-effective basis, and were only going to people whose disabilities were both serious and permanent. Because if not serious or permanent, the existing safety net of the disability support pension was meant to apply. Now, from day one, not enough thought was given to making sure the scheme was properly ring-fenced, or that there was enough governance in place. And that's because its development was rushed because, and I was there, I remember it well, Julia Gillard, who was the PM who brought in the NDIS, was being hunted by the return of Kevin Rudd. So she needed a quick political win in the hope she could hold him off, which, of course, as history shows, she didn't. Back in those days, Gillard rushed in a scheme that was originally thought to be for some 500,000 beneficiaries. Well, that's now closer to 1 million. It was a scheme originally thought to cost around $12 billion a year. Now it's heading towards $60 billion and beyond. And a scheme too that was originally thought to be funded 50-50 between the Commonwealth and the states that will soon have the feds, or federal taxpayers, meaning you, on the hook for some 70% of its total funding. And because the Gillard government didn't want the NDIS to be altered in any way, whether it had needed it or not down the track, the governance of the NDIS was vested in a ministerial council. So sitting across the Commonwealth and states, meaning that no level of government and no one minister was ever really in charge or properly responsible to taxpayers for the billions spent. Going back to those sinkhole comments from Gary Banks, it's now emerged in reports today that the coalition in government wanted to establish an objective vetting system where access to the NDIS was controlled by the government and independent medicos rather than by the client's doctors and other health specialists. But in a furious reaction from Labor at the time and the disability lobby about so-called cuts to a service where costs were actually exploding, so not being cut, well, all that meant this never happened. Well, now the scheme's original architect alongside Julia Gillard, and that's the Disabilities Minister Bill Shorten, well, he's back in charge of the NDIS. If there's one person with the moral standing to get the changes necessary past the NDIS lobby, well, that's Shorten. Now, the question is, does Bill Shorten have the will to rein in a scheme that's already costing Australians almost as much as our entire defence budget? Well, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who doesn't support the NDIS as originally designed. But unless costs and eligibility are brought back under control, well, Bill Shorten, that public support will erode quickly.